Imagine a world where power is absolute and betrayal is a daily occurrence. Welcome to the story of Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso, a notorious figure in the dark underbelly of organized crime. Born into a family steeped in the legacy of the Mafia, Anthony's childhood was shaped by the ruthless lessons of loyalty, manipulation, and violence. As he navigated the treacherous streets of Brooklyn, Casso learned that in this world, trust was a commodity few could afford. From an early age, he was drawn into the shadowy realms of the Genovese crime family, where the scent of cigar smoke mingled with whispers of ambition and treachery. Each encounter with powerful mobsters reinforced a chilling truth. In the Mafia, betrayal is often met with deadly consequences. Join us as we delve into the rise of Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso, from his formative years overshadowed by his father's criminal empire to his meteoric ascent within the Lucchese family. Discover how his ruthless tactics and strategic brilliance earned him a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of rivals and allies alike. But with great power comes great peril, and as we unravel Casso's story, we'll witness the harrowing price he paid for his ambition, a legacy marked by violence, betrayal, and ultimately his own downfall. Prepare to enter a world where the stakes are high and the consequences are deadly, as we explore the tumultuous journey of a man who sought to control it all, only to find himself ensnared by the very darkness he embraced. The streets of Brooklyn in the 1940s were a patchwork of light and shadow, where the glittering promise of the American dream collided with the grim realities of poverty and crime. It was in this uneasy landscape that Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso was born, his fate inextricably linked to the dark underbelly of the city he called home. Casso's father, Michael, was a man of few words but immense power within the Genovese crime family. His influence stretched across the borough, a testament to the loyalty he had earned through a lifetime of ruthless efficiency. It was this legacy that young Anthony would inherit, his path shaped by the shadow cast by his father's criminal empire. From an early age, Anthony was exposed to the inner workings of the Mafia. He would often accompany his father on visits to the family's social clubs, where made men and capos would gather to discuss the business of the family. The air was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and the murmur of hushed conversations, a symphony of power and violence that would become the soundtrack to Anthony's formative years. As he grew older, Anthony's fascination with the Mafia only deepened. He observed the delicate balance of loyalty and betrayal that governed the criminal underworld, a world where a single misstep could mean the difference between life and death. The lessons he learned were not those of a typical childhood. Instead of fairy tales and bedtime stories, Anthony was schooled in the art of manipulation, the importance of silence, and the ruthless pursuit of power. His father, Michael, took a keen interest in his son's development, recognizing the potential that lurked beneath Anthony's youthful facade. The elder Casso saw in his son a reflection of his own ambition, a hunger for control that could be harnessed and molded to serve the family's interests. Under his father's tutelage, Anthony learned the intricacies of the Mafia's operations, from the intricate web of alliances to the brutal methods employed to maintain dominance. Yet, even as Anthony's knowledge and skills grew, his relationship with his father remained distant and transactional. Michael Casso was a man who valued loyalty above all else, and he demanded the same unwavering dedication from his son. Any sign of weakness or hesitation was met with swift and merciless punishment, a harsh lesson that would shape Anthony's own approach to the criminal world. As Anthony navigated the treacherous waters of the Mafia, he witnessed firsthand the consequences of betrayal. He saw once powerful men reduced to broken shells, their lives snuffed out with a single bullet or a shallow grave. The message was clear. In the world of organized crime, there was no room for mercy or compassion. Loyalty was the currency that mattered most, and those who failed to pay the price were swiftly and irrevocably cast aside. It was against this backdrop that Anthony Casso's own criminal ambitions began to take shape. The lessons he had learned from his father, combined with his innate cunning and ruthlessness, would soon propel him into the upper echelons of the Lucchese crime family, a journey that would cement his reputation as one of the most feared and reviled mobsters in American history. As the young Anthony Casso stood on the precipice of his criminal career, the seeds of his future infamy had already been sown. The roots of darkness that had been planted in his formative years would soon blossom into a legacy of violence, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of power. A legacy that would forever mark the Casso name in the annals of organized crime. The streets of Brooklyn in the 1960s were a breeding ground for the ambitious and the ruthless, and Anthony Gaspipe Casso was no exception. Having been raised in the shadow of his father's criminal empire, Casso had learned from a young age the value of loyalty, the power of intimidation, and the necessity of eliminating any who dared to stand in his way. Casso's entry into the world of organized crime came through the South Brooklyn Boys, a crew of young, up-and-coming mobsters with ties to the Lucchese crime family. It was here that Casso's natural talent for violence and strategic thinking began to shine. He quickly rose through the ranks, proving his worth with a series of daring heists and brutal beatings that sent a clear message to anyone who crossed his path. One such incident occurred when Casso was just 22 years old. A rival crew had been encroaching on the South Brooklyn Boys' territory, skimming profits and disrespecting the Lucchese family's authority. Casso, ever the pragmatist, knew that decisive action was needed to restore order. He gathered a small team of trusted associates and set out to send a message that would echo through the criminal underworld. The target was a high-ranking member of the rival crew, a man known for his ruthlessness and unpredictability. Casso and his men tracked their target to a dingy warehouse, where they lay in wait, their weapons loaded and their nerves steeled. When the target arrived, Casso sprang into action, his .38 caliber revolver barking with deadly precision. The man crumpled to the ground, his life snuffed out in a matter of seconds. As the body was dragged away, Casso's reputation began to spread. Word of his cold-blooded efficiency and his unwavering loyalty to the Lucchese family reached the ears of the family's leadership, and it wasn't long before Casso was summoned to a meeting with the capo, Vincent Caffaro. Caffaro, a seasoned veteran of the Mafia, was immediately impressed by the young Casso. His ruthlessness, his attention to detail, and his willingness to do whatever was necessary to further the family's interests all aligned with Caffaro's own values. In that moment, Casso's fate was sealed. He had proven himself worthy of the Lucchese family's trust, and Caffaro wasted no time in bringing him into the fold. Over the next few years, Casso's rise within the Lucchese organization was meteoric. He quickly established himself as a trusted enforcer, handling everything from debt collection to contract killings with a level of efficiency that left his superiors in awe. His ability to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries within the mafia world was unparalleled, and he soon became known as a master strategist, able to anticipate the moves of his enemies and outmaneuver them at every turn. As Casso's power and influence grew, so too did his reputation for violence. He was feared and respected in equal measure, a man who would stop at nothing to protect the interests of the Lucchese family. His ruthlessness and attention to detail earned him the nickname Gaspipe, a moniker that struck fear into the hearts of those who crossed his path. Yet even as Casso's criminal empire expanded, he remained fiercely loyal to the Lucchese family. He knew that his success was inextricably linked to the family's success, and he was willing to do whatever it took to ensure their continued dominance. Whether it was eliminating a troublesome rival or brokering a lucrative deal, Casso's unwavering dedication to the Lucchese cause made him an indispensable asset. As the 1970s drew to a close, Casso's reputation had reached legendary status within the mafia world. He had become a force to be reckoned with, a man whose very name was synonymous with power, violence, and the uncompromising pursuit of wealth and influence. And with the Lucchese family's backing, Casso's ambitions knew no bounds. The air crackled with an electric tension as Anthony Gaspipe Casso strode through the dimly lit backrooms of the Lucchese crime family's headquarters. His piercing gaze swept over the assembled capos and soldiers, commanding their undivided attention. This was his domain now, a kingdom he had clawed his way to the top of through a relentless campaign of cunning and brutality. As the newly appointed consigliere, Casso had cemented his position as one of the most powerful figures in the Lucchese family. His reputation for ruthless efficiency had preceded him, and his subordinates knew better than to cross him. With a nod, he signaled the start of the meeting, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. "Gentlemen, we have much to discuss." Casso's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Our operations have been expanding, and with that comes new opportunities and new threats." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Casso's rise to power had been a carefully orchestrated campaign, marked by strategic alliances, calculated betrayals, and the elimination of any who dared to challenge his authority. As consigliere, he now oversaw the family's vast criminal empire, which had grown to encompass a vast network of drug trafficking, racketeering, and murder for hire. "The Colombos have been encroaching on our territory in Queens," Casso continued, his voice laced with a menacing edge. "I want them dealt with swiftly and decisively. No more of this back-and-forth bullshit." He slammed his fist on the table, eliciting a collective flinch from the assembled mobsters. Casso's reputation for brutality was well earned. He had personally overseen the execution of numerous rivals, earning him the nickname Gaspipe for his methodical and cold-blooded approach to eliminating threats. His ruthlessness had become the stuff of legend, striking fear into the hearts of even the most hardened criminals. As the meeting progressed, Casso outlined his plans for expanding the family's operations, detailing new drug pipelines and lucrative extortion schemes. His lieutenants listened intently, their eyes betraying a mixture of respect and trepidation. They knew that Casso's word was law, and failure to execute his directives would result in severe consequences. Casso's rise to power had not been without its challenges, however. He had navigated a treacherous web of alliances and betrayals, constantly on the lookout for those who sought to undermine his authority. His paranoia had become a defining characteristic, leading him to surround himself with a tight-knit circle of trusted associates who were as loyal to him as they were to the family. One such trusted lieutenant was Salvatore Sal Avellino, a seasoned capo who had proven his mettle time and again. Casso valued Avellino's strategic acumen and unwavering loyalty, and the two had forged a formidable partnership that helped solidify the Lucchese family's dominance in the criminal underworld. As the meeting drew to a close, Casso leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He had amassed an empire, a sprawling criminal network that generated millions in illicit profits. But for Casso, the true measure of his power lay in the fear and respect he commanded from those around him. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed the assembled capos, knowing that his word was law. As he made his way to his private office, Casso couldn't help but reflect on the long road that had brought him to this point, a journey paved with the broken bodies of those who had dared to challenge his supremacy. The Lucchese family was his domain now, and Casso intended to rule it with an iron fist. The city's criminal landscape would tremble in his wake. For Gaspipe was a force to be reckoned with, a ruthless mastermind who had carved out a legacy of fear and infamy that would echo through the annals of organized crime. The weight of Anthony Gaspipe Casso's empire pressed heavily upon his shoulders, a constant reminder of the precarious nature of his reign. As the consigliere of the Lucchese crime family, he had risen to the pinnacle of power. But with that came a crippling paranoia that threatened to unravel his carefully constructed criminal web. Casso's ascent had been marked by a ruthless efficiency, a willingness to eliminate any perceived threat to his dominance. He had built a sprawling criminal empire, trafficking drugs, extorting businesses, and orchestrating a litany of murders for hire. Yet, as his influence grew, so too did his fear of betrayal. The shadows that had once been his allies now seemed to harbor enemies at every turn. Casso's once trusted capos and soldiers were now viewed with suspicion, their every word and action scrutinized for the slightest hint of disloyalty. He had learned the hard way that loyalty in the mafia was a fleeting commodity, and he was determined not to be the victim of another's treachery. One by one, Casso systematically eliminated those he deemed a threat, his Gaspipe moniker a testament to the cold, calculated nature of his killings. Informants were silenced, disloyal soldiers were made to sleep with the fishes, and even members of his own family were not spared from his ruthless purge. The betrayal that cut deepest, however, was the one that came from within his own ranks. Capo Vincent Caffaro, the man who had brought Casso into the Lucchese family, had grown increasingly uneasy with the consigliere's thirst for power and his willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. Caffaro's concerns eventually led him to become a government informant, a decision that would seal his own fate. When Casso discovered Caffaro's betrayal, his rage knew no bounds. He orchestrated a brutal retaliation, ordering the execution of Caffaro's son-in-law, a chilling message to all who dared to cross him. The murder was carried out with Casso's signature efficiency, a grim reminder of the consequences of defying the consigliere. As the bodies piled up and the noose of law enforcement tightened around him, Casso's paranoia only intensified. He became increasingly isolated, trusting no one but his most loyal soldiers. His criminal empire, once a source of power and wealth, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping him in a world of his own creation. The lavish lifestyle that had once been a symbol of his success now served as a constant reminder of the sacrifices he had made to maintain his reign. Casso's days were spent in a haze of cocaine and alcohol, his nights haunted by the ghosts of those he had betrayed and the specter of his own downfall. As the walls closed in, Casso's grip on power began to slip. The very qualities that had propelled him to the top, his ruthlessness, his strategic brilliance, and his unwavering dedication to the Lucchese family, had become the shackles that threatened to drag him down into the abyss of his own creation. The cost of power, Casso was beginning to realize, was a heavy one indeed. The once feared consigliere had become a prisoner of his own success, trapped in a web of betrayal and violence that he had woven with his own hands. The question now was whether he would have the strength to escape its clutches before it was too late. The noose was tightening around Anthony Gaspipe Casso's neck, and he could feel the weight of his empire crumbling beneath him. For years, he had reigned as the all-powerful consigliere of the Lucchese crime family, his ruthless tactics and unwavering ambition elevating him to the highest echelons of the mafia. But now, as the walls closed in, Casso found himself facing the unthinkable, the prospect of betraying the very organization he had sworn to protect. The beginning of the end had started with a series of missteps, each one chipping away at the carefully constructed facade of Casso's invincibility. First, there had been the botched hit on Gambino family boss John Gotti, a move that had not only failed to eliminate a dangerous rival, but had also drawn the unwanted attention of law enforcement. Then, the defection of his trusted lieutenant, Salvatore Sal Avellino, had left Casso feeling exposed and vulnerable, his once impenetrable network of informants and loyalists suddenly rife with cracks. As the noose tightened, Casso's paranoia reached new heights. He had spent years cultivating a reputation for ruthlessness, and the thought of being betrayed by his own men filled him with a seething rage. The betrayals continued, with one by one his closest associates turning against him, seeking to save themselves from the impending doom that Casso's downfall would bring. In the end, it was the betrayal of his own cousin, Peter Chiodo, that proved to be Casso's undoing. Chiodo, once a loyal soldier in the Lucchese family, had been flipped by federal authorities, providing them with a treasure trove of information that would ultimately lead to Casso's arrest. The day of the arrest was a surreal and humiliating experience for the once mighty mobster. As the FBI agents swarmed his hideout in Queens, Casso knew that his reign of terror had come to an end. He had always prided himself on his ability to outmaneuver the authorities, but this time, the net had been cast too wide, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. In the aftermath of his capture, Casso faced a crucial decision, one that would test the very core of his being. Would he maintain his loyalty to the mafia, refusing to cooperate with the authorities, and risk spending the rest of his life behind bars? Or would he betray the code of silence that had protected him for so long, trading his testimony for a chance at leniency? Initially, Casso remained defiant, spitting in the face of the federal agents who interrogated him. He had spent his entire life building a reputation for being untouchable, and the thought of becoming an informant was anathema to everything he believed in. But as the reality of his situation set in, and the prospect of spending the rest of his days in a prison cell became increasingly real, Casso's resolve began to crumble. The turning point came when the prosecutors presented Casso with the overwhelming evidence against him. a veritable mountain of testimony, forensic evidence, and wiretaps that left no doubt as to his involvement in a litany of crimes from murder to racketeering. Faced with the certainty of a life sentence, Casso finally relented, agreeing to become a cooperating witness in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The betrayal was complete, and Casso's testimony would go on to implicate dozens of his former associates, including some of the most powerful figures in the Lucchese crime family. The irony of the situation was not lost on Casso, who had spent his entire career cultivating a reputation for being unbreakable. Now, he found himself reduced to a mere pawn, his once formidable power reduced to a bargaining chip in the high-stakes game of federal prosecution. As Casso sat in his cell, awaiting sentencing, he could not help but reflect on the true cost of his ambition. The lavish lifestyle, the respect and fear he had commanded, the bodies he had left in his wake, all of it had come crashing down around him, leaving him a broken and humiliated man. The realization that his life's work had been for naught, that his legacy would be one of betrayal and shame, weighed heavily on his mind, a bitter pill to swallow for a man who had once believed himself to be untouchable. In the end, Casso's testimony, though deemed unreliable by the court, still managed to secure him a staggering 455-year prison sentence, a symbolic gesture that underscored the gravity of his crimes and the finality of his downfall. As he was led away to serve out the remainder of his days behind bars, Casso could not help but wonder if the price he had paid for his power was worth it, or if the true cost of a life dedicated to the Mafia had been his own soul. The echoes of Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso's reign of terror had reverberated through the criminal underworld for years, but as the final chapter of his story unfolded, the true cost of his ambition became painfully clear. Casso's downfall, marked by his desperate attempt to save himself, had stripped away the veneer of power and control he had so meticulously cultivated. In 1993, the walls finally closed in on the once feared consigliere. Years of meticulous investigation by law enforcement had amassed a formidable case against him, leaving Casso with little choice but to confront the harsh reality of his situation. Gone were the days when his mere presence could inspire fear and obedience. Now, he was a cornered animal, forced to make a choice that would forever alter the trajectory of his life. Casso's initial reaction was one of defiance. He refused to cooperate with the authorities, clinging to the code of silence that had served him so well in the past. But as the weight of his impending fate settled upon him, the cracks in his armor began to show. The man who had once commanded the loyalty of his subordinates now found himself utterly alone, abandoned by those he had betrayed and manipulated. In a desperate bid for leniency, Casso made the unthinkable decision to become a government informant, betraying the very organization he had once sworn to protect. His testimony, however, was met with skepticism, as the authorities recognized the inherent unreliability of a man who had built his reputation on deceit and violence. The court proceedings that followed were a stark contrast to the power and influence Casso had once wielded. Gone were the days when his mere presence could silence a room. Now he was reduced to a broken man, pleading for mercy before a system he had spent his life defying. The judge, unmoved by Casso's pleas, handed down a sentence that was nothing short of staggering: 455 years in prison. As Casso sat in the cold, sterile confines of the courtroom, the weight of his choices finally began to sink in. The empire he had so ruthlessly built the loyalty he had demanded, and the lives he had taken, all of it had amounted to nothing more than a fleeting illusion of power. The true cost of his ambition had been the very freedom he had sought to control. In the years that followed, Casso's name became synonymous with the brutality and corruption that had long plagued the mafia. His story served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of power and the heavy price that must be paid for a life dedicated to the underworld. The once feared consigliere had become a cautionary figure, a tragic example of the inevitable downfall that awaits those who choose to live by the sword. As the final chapter of Casso's life drew to a close, the true legacy he left behind was not one of power and influence, but of a life consumed by the very darkness he had embraced. The empire he had built crumbled, and the loyalty he had demanded vanished, leaving him alone and forgotten in the cold confines of a prison cell, a prisoner of his own making. The story of Anthony Gaspipe Casso stands as a testament to the corrupting influence of power, the fleeting nature of loyalty, and the true cost of a life dedicated to crime. It is a narrative that serves as a stark reminder that even the mightiest of empires, built on the backs of fear and violence, can ultimately crumble, leaving behind a legacy that echoes not with triumph, but with the haunting whispers of a life wasted in pursuit of an elusive and ultimately hollow victory. As we conclude the story of Anthony Gaspipe Casso, we're left with a stark reminder of the fragile nature of power and the inevitable consequences of a life steeped in crime. Casso's journey through the mafia's ranks was marked by ambition and ruthlessness, but it ultimately spiraled into paranoia and betrayal. In the end, Casso's rise to power became his downfall. The very tactics that propelled him to the pinnacle of the Lucchese crime family, his cold-blooded efficiency, strategic brilliance, and unwavering loyalty, turned against him. Friends became foes, and the walls of his empire crumbled as those he trusted sought to save themselves. His decision to cooperate with authorities sealed his fate, transforming him from feared consigliere to a cautionary tale of betrayal. Today, Casso's name is etched in the annals of organized crime, not as a symbol of triumph, but as a testament to the dark legacy of the mafia, a legacy that serves as a grim reminder of the cost of power. The shadows that once adorned his life now echo with the whispers of a man who traded loyalty for survival, leaving behind a haunting narrative of ambition gone awry. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Anthony Gaspipe Casso. If you found this story intriguing, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more gripping tales from the world of organized crime. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Casso's choices? Did he have any chance of redemption? Until next time, remember, in the world of the mafia, the price of power is often paid in blood.